set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at the UK attraction of your choice. The summer fun could be on us. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but actually it's about you.
And we won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear
All sides.
as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
You'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes, she could have said storm. You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Tom Harwood, bringing you the State of the Nation tonight. Sir Keir Starmer launches the Labour Party's manifesto in Manchester.
I'm proud, in this place, in this city, to launch Labour's general election manifesto, a manifesto for wealth creation, a plan to change Britain.
But is the Labour Party the party of wealth creation? How does this square with £8.6 billion of announced tax rises and potentially more to come? Find out shortly. We'll also be digging into some of those other key pledges, everything from votes at 16 to GB Energy to a higher minimum wage on young people. And Nigel Farage has given us some insight into what his vision of the future of Conservative opposition looks like, admitting he would be willing to lead the Tory party in the future. What does that say about the future of Conservatism? Plus, are we to trust the Labour Party with our constitution? New reforms suggest Parliament could be changed beyond all recognition. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my panel, the journalist and Conservative peer Lord Goodman and the GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, plus a host of other experts and head honchos. All that coming up after your very latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Tom, thank you very much. The top stories this hour. Sir Keir Starmer set out Labour's manifesto today, reaffirming his commitment to no rises to income tax or national insurance. The Labour leader put economic growth and stability at the core of his party's plan, promising to end what he called a desperate era of gestures and gimmicks. Back on the campaign trail in Crewe, he rejected Rishi Sunak's suggestion of higher taxes and said Britain will do better under Labour.
It is a manifesto that rejects fundamentally the proposition that Britain can't do better than this, that we have to go on in the way we've been going on in the last 14 years. It is a rejection of that. Britain can do better, Britain will do better, and with our manifesto and a mandate for a Labour government, we will take our country forward, and that will be felt in every community across the country.
The Liberal Democrats described Labour's manifesto as a gamble on economic growth that fails to set out how wealth will be shared more evenly. Sir Ed Davey joined his party's candidate for Tunbridge Wells, Mike Martin, at an obstacle course this afternoon. He said that trickle-down economics will not fix broken Britain.
Suggesting £9 billion of investment to rescue our NHS, and we're talking about investment to help the poorest in our society, and we want to make sure that we've got the capital investment, in social homes, in the fight against climate change, and making sure the nature crisis is dealt with. So we have an ambitious policy package in the Liberal Democrats, and on top of that, we're the only party saying we need to reform our politics.
And all G7 countries have agreed to continue funding a loan package for Ukraine worth nearly £40 billion. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the funds would be backed by proceeds from immobilised Russian assets. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak held a bilateral meeting with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky today. Mr Sunak has called the funding package game-changing. US President Joe Biden and Volodymyr Zelensky have signed a 10-year bilateral security agreement aimed at bolstering Ukraine's defence against Russia's invaders.
Collectively, this is a powerful set of actions and will create a stronger foundation for Ukraine's success. 2.5 years ago, Putin unleashed a brutal war in Ukraine, and it's been a horrifying ordeal for the Ukrainian people who are so brave and incredible. It's also been a test for the world. Would we stand with Ukraine? Would we stand for sovereignty, freedom, and against tyranny? The United States, the G7, and countries around the world have consistently answered the question by saying, yes, we will. We will say it again. Yes, again and again and again.
For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom.
Good evening. This is State of the Nation. Now, first of all, before I get into the regular programme tonight, some news has just broken. And that news is a new poll. It was commissioned by The Times and The Sunday Times and carried out by YouGov. This poll shows, for the first time in polling history, the Reform Party has overtaken the Conservative Party in the polls. That's right, 19% for the Reform Party, 18% for the Conservative Party and 37% for the Labour Party. A larger than 20-point lead, but Reform 1 percentage point ahead of the Conservatives. Now, it must be said, there's a health warning to this. That is within the margin of error on this poll. But it is a symbolic moment in this general election campaign. We'll have more on that later in the programme. But now, today, Sir Keir Starmer announced Labour's manifesto, and one thing is clear. Sir Keir wants you to believe that the Labour Party has changed. But is this true? Is the Labour Party now pro-growth, pro-business and pro-wealth? Well, let's take a look at the data. With both the Conservatives and Labour's manifestos, we can compare the projections of the overall tax burden under both parties. Now, the graph here shows tax as a share of GDP by the end of the decade. Current forecasts project the overall tax burden to reach 37% of GDP. Under a Conservative government, the tax burden is slightly less than those current forecasts, expected to increase nonetheless to 36.7%, the highest in 70 years. But with the Labour Party's announcement today of billions in new taxes, Labour's overall tax burden is projected to reach an all-time high, not just 70 years, higher than any time since 1688, when records began. The projection comes in at 37.4% of GDP. Now, time and time again, we hear from both leaders that taxes would not go up under their leadership, or indeed that they might come down. Both of these scenarios assume £25 billion in spending cuts, a new era of austerity across various departments, baked in under Jeremy Hunt's latest budget. Now, despite both of these parties seeming to commit to these cuts in their plans, the Institute of Fiscal Studies has called them fictitious cuts. Few seriously believe either party would push ahead with those budget reductions, so might it be the case that we're set for a further £25 billion in tax rises, over and above the tax rises that have already been announced? Where might those taxes come from? Well, perhaps a 2018 pamphlet from Rachel Reeves might give us a clue. She called for a radical overhaul of the tax system to raise, get this, over £20 billion a year. It all is starting to add up. The pamphlet went on to call for increasing council tax, introducing a landlord tax, an attack on pensions, a tax on land, an increase in inheritance tax, and more taxes on stocks, shares, and investment. But it wasn't just 2018. As recently as 2021, Rachel Reeves said she wanted to hike taxes on those who get their incomes from stocks and shares and buy-to-let properties. Might it be that when Labour says it doesn't want to raise taxes on working people, it will instead raise over £20 billion in new taxes on those stocks, those shares, those homes and those assets? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by a former special advisor to Tony Blair, Darren Murphy. And Darren, I'm sure you'll share my scepticism here, because the plans for both the Conservatives and the Labour Party pretend there'll be lots of spending cuts. Do you believe them?
I think that the Labour manifesto that was unveiled today makes it pretty clear that VAT, national insurance and income tax won't rise under a Labour government. And so I think we should start from that basis. But the projections that you've just given give the game away for the Conservatives, I would say, in that they demonstrate that on any one of your projections, the tax GDP take is forecast to rise. The nonsense that we've seen this week, and I think you're seeing it played out in the polls, is a whole series of claims about taxes, a whole series of claims about tax cuts. And in reality, I don't think you can make a decision in a general election in some sort of Dutch auction about a tiny proportion of government spending. You know, even on your projections, Tom, you're talking about what, 0.3 billion pounds? I mean, today, when you look at the tax take that's being suggested in the Labour proposals in the manifesto, most of those are about closing tax loopholes that exist from non-DOMs and from other tax loopholes. I think it's what, 5.2 billion. So I think what you can see is that the tax take projections are a little bit in the eye of the beholder. The Tories claim that they're not raising taxes, but in fact we know they are. The Labour manifesto makes absolutely clear that there's no intention to raise income tax or national insurance or VAT.
That's not true, though, is it, Darren? Because, of course, both the Conservatives and the Labour Party have committed to freezing tax thresholds through to 2028. That means, unless inflation is zero, there will be effective tax rises under both the Conservatives and the Labour Party due to the phenomenon of fiscal drag. Now, the Conservatives are mitigating that for pensioners. They've promised to raise thresholds so that the state pension is never taxed. And indeed, they've promised to cut national insurance so people in work will also get a bit of relief on that baked-in tax rise. The Labour Party is doing neither. So the Labour Party will see working people taxed more, not less.
No, I think what you need to look at is that your projection makes it clear that we have historically high levels of taxation at the moment.
When you say no, do you mean that Labour has not committed to those frozen tax thresholds?
It's absolutely clear that, and Rachel Reeves has set out all the tax plans in detail, and it makes it absolutely clear that no national insurance rise, no VAT rise, no income tax rise.
The thresholds, however, are frozen.
Well, I think part of the problem is that the way the shambles of Liz Truss's period in power and the way the Tories have governed for the last 14 years has meant that the tax take is too high. I think it would be far better to grow the economy and to ensure that our GDP grows instead of our tax rates growing.
And
I think
yet,
that's at the heart. No, hold on.
Both parties show that tax take going up. The Labour Party, the highest ever.
We're supposed to be talking about the manifesto. I think it's right that there are a whole range of tax avoidance that loopholes that we close. I think it's right that we start to say that working class kids should have as many opportunities as their parents have, as many ambitions for their children. I think we do need to talk about how we improve the health service. I think we do need to talk about how we grow public services. But I think
there's a question of honesty here.
No, I'm being honest. I think the difference in this manifesto from previous manifestos, including, frankly, the Blair manifestos from 97 onwards, is that the focus is absolutely on wealth creation, not really on distribution, and that the way to distribute wealth and opportunity is to create more wealth, create more opportunities. And I think that is at the heart of where this manifesto is about. It's a complete change from...
There is some supply-side reform, but ultimately, on Labour's own numbers, even ignoring the 25 billion of fictitious cuts, that's the words of the IFS, not the words of me, even ignoring that 25 billion, this takes us to the highest tax burden in recorded history.
Well, that's because we're going to take tax from people who are currently avoiding it. We're going to take tax from people who, like non-doms, who have made a conscious effort to try to avoid paying the tax for the price of living in this country. So, of course, the tax burden will rise on people who are avoiding tax. Of course, the tax burden will rise for people who don't pay it. What I'm saying
and
is
the country as a whole. Darren Murphy, I'm afraid we have run to the end of the segment, but thank you so much for putting your case across so spiritedly. Really appreciate your time here on State of the Nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm joined now by GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Because, Christopher, I want to talk to you first of all about this breaking news that there is this new poll from YouGov showing for the first time Reform 1 point ahead of the Conservative Party.
Hi, Tom.
Your thoughts?
Tom, that's right. Yeah, joining us in the spin run before the seven-way debate starting on 8:30 here, and I'll be back with you all for the spin run action from 10 p.m. But before that starts, some big news in terms of this election campaign. A YouGov poll for the Times tonight says that we have crossover. What that means is that Reform UK is now the second biggest party in the polls. They're on 19 points, 1 point ahead of the Conservative Party on 18. Labour miles ahead on 37 points. This is a moment which many people have been fearing on the Tory side. They're worried about Nigel Farage's resurgent Reform UK party since he became leader about 10 days ago. And now they are the second biggest party in the polls. This will further depress Tories as they try and stave off what they admit would be a Labour supermajority on July the 4th.
Now, Chris, that is a pretty profound moment. Of course, it will differ in different seats, and this is within the margin of error. But, of course, it is a symbolic moment in this campaign. Let's quickly turn to the Labour Party, because I've noticed you've been thumbing your way through the Labour Party manifesto. And you've been reading it with such meticulous detail, you noticed a spelling error.
Yeah, it was border command with one M. On the same page, there's another spelling mistake. I mean, I only pointed it out in jest, really, because, you know, we all make spelling mistakes, even in our world, Tom. But it seemed to annoy people on Twitter that we saw it and made a joke that there should be spelling lessons, maybe rather than brushing your teeth lessons, Tom, if Labour form the next government. But no, I think it was, you know, it was a workaday manifesto. It did what it had to do, which is not to jeopardise the party's staggering lead in the polls. Nothing spectacular, nothing exciting. It's what they wanted to do, and we are now exactly 21 days into the campaign with 21 days to go. It's half-time. Essentially, if it's a football match, it's half-time and the Tories are down 4-0 and they've got to win 5-4. They've got to score 5 goals without any reply from Labour in the back end of this campaign. It's all about shoe leather or tyres being worn out on roads, getting around the country and being energetically trying to get that message out there. But I mean, frankly, I think there's a feeling in the country of a need for change, and even that is recognised by top Tories now. Yeah, no, it's remarkable. But Chris, you sat down with Keir Starmer earlier today, and there was one moment that I think lots of people will have seen. It has done the rounds, certainly here in Westminster. It's become a bit of a moment. And that's, of course, when you referenced Keir Starmer talking about his father, what his father did for a living, and the audience reaction. I believe we've got a clip. Let's have a listen.
So when someone laughed last night, my dad would have turned in his grave.
Was that a bit of snobbishness towards your dad, do you think?
I don't know what caused someone to laugh.
No.
But if you're laughing at someone because they work in a factory, then that is the one thing that I think had a massive impact on someone like my dad, the disrespect. And it's in me. You can see I'm angry about it.
You are angry.
Frustrated.
Do you think that the audience was laughing at Keir Starmer's father because of his job or who he was, or at his father at all? Or is Keir Starmer over-interpreting this? Might it have been just when you hear a politician say the same phraseology in the same way again and again and again, it does become comedic?
Well, Tom, I'll be honest with you. That's what I thought. In fact, I asked the question because I was trying to get to the point that maybe voters are getting bored of you saying the same thing, that your dad's a toolmaker and he worked in a factory. And I was trying to get to the point, change the script, Sir Keir Starmer. That was where I was going with the question, and I was completely blindsided, frankly, by his answer. Now, I was sitting across from him at the back of that battle bus, the red Labour battle bus, and his eyes were welling up. And he just said, no, let me finish here. And he said in terms that when he grew up, his dad was mocked by people for saying he worked in a factory. His dad stopped saying it in polite company. He stopped going out. He withdrew into himself because he felt that people didn't respect him in the part of Surrey he lived in. And that is Keir Starmer's lived experience of people laughing about his dad. And I think he probably thought that at school. I think he probably thought it in the early part of his life. And so when he hears it now on the political stage, even though he's in his early 60s, it cut him to the core. And he said so. And I think you and I know why people were laughing. They were laughing because of the familiarity with that expression by Keir Starmer. But that doesn't make it wrong for him to say what he said.
No, it doesn't make it wrong for him to take it one way, even if it perhaps was given in another. I do wonder if Keir Starmer perhaps is starting to sound a little Theresa May-ish. And it's only because Rishi Sunak also does that it's not particularly picked up upon. But Christopher Hope, really, really fascinating interview that you conducted with the Leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition earlier today. Look forward to what you have more as the evening progresses. Christopher Hope there, our political editor. Well, after the break, I'll be speaking to yet another one of Tony Blair's former advisors, as well as my most intellectual panel. Plus, could this be the end of our British Constitution as we know it?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Recent polling suggests dentistry has become the hardest NHS service for patients to access, within NHS treatments still 15% lower than pre-pandemic levels. So a YouGov survey reveals that more than 70% of Brits describe seeing the dentist as difficult, compared with 64% for GPs and 42% for A&E services. One British man, get this, he even took to flying 10,000 miles for dental care, saying the extra time and money spent was far less hassle than trying to get an appointment on the NHS. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs. And a shocking 1/5 of UK adults have also admitted to trying DIY dentistry, including the old trick of tying string around a wobbly tooth and slamming it in the door so it comes out. So should people be more careful when taking their teeth into their own hands.
That is one of the problems. Obviously, population growth makes it much more difficult for people to access NHS services, but they need to then catch up on the other side with dental services and increase the amount of dentists and access to dentistry, and especially NHS dentistry, obviously.
What's the cut-off age for free dentistry on the NHS?
So it is 18 years old, but there are exemptions around maternity, pregnancy. There's some free care around pregnancy.
We saw some data a few weeks back about the number one cause for child admission into A&E is tooth decay. I mean, that was shocking when I read it.
It's really bad, and what happens is people, kids with multiple decayed teeth, they basically have to be put under general anaesthetic, and then all those rotted teeth have to be extracted under general anaesthetic. Like, if those baby teeth start going crooked, then the adult teeth start going crooked as well. So it is important to look after the baby teeth. It's really important. I think they should make it more central to their policies, definitely.
The People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
To help change your relationship with food, start your own weight loss journey. Find your nearest gastric balloon group clinic and book a free consultation.
Been to Poland? You'd love it. There's Warsaw, really picturesque. Don't forget to look up. Journey north to the famous port of Gdansk. And when you've done that, you can go to...
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm Tom Harwood and the time is 8:23. Now, we've been discussing the Labour Party's manifesto, including what it means for the overall tax burden. But it's not just tax. There's plenty more. As expected, it's included in its plan is to grant voting rights to 16-year-olds. Plans for GB Energy, a new investment vehicle for the government. The self-proclaimed nationalised energy company, which is actually just that investment vehicle. And, of course, NHS plans too. But who better to ask about it than one of Tony Blair's former special advisors? Yes, another one. John McTernan joins me now. John, thank you so much for making the time this evening. It's a big day for the Labour Party, but perhaps the biggest overriding watchword here has been caution and, to some extent, a level of vagueness.
I really think that's wrong. I think it's a radical manifesto with a substantive offer to lots and lots of groups, particularly young people who are offered one thing by the Tory party, compulsory national service, and are offered a range of things by the Labour Party.
OK, let's go to one of those things that is offered to young people from the Labour Party, equalising the national minimum wage. Now, when you worked for Tony Blair, of course, he introduced the minimum wage. Many people warned that it would increase unemployment. One of the reasons why it didn't, or at least didn't drastically compared to where unemployment might have been otherwise, is that there was a committee established to set out what the rules of the minimum wage should be, that it should be kept low enough that you wouldn't put too many people out of work. And one of the recommendations of that committee was to offer a graduated step into the minimum wage. Because one of the big risks, of course, when you have a price floor on wages is young people are the first to get the cut. Why then is Keir Starmer so desperate to get rid of that plan that was introduced by Tony Blair that mitigated any unemployment risks from a minimum wage?
Two reasons. One, he's not Tony Blair. He's not a Blairite. And two, we've learned from experience, and we've seen a government. One of the few things that this government's done successfully is introducing what they call a national living wage, basically the Labour Party living wage. They built on a Labour success, but they've kept the discrimination for 18 to 21-year-olds. There's no justification for saying an 18-year-old is not an adult. There's no justification for giving them a lower wage.
because they're 18, 19,
John,
or 20.
here's a justification. In France, you have double-digit youth unemployment. In
Well,
other
France.
countries that have less labour market flexibility, you see far higher youth unemployment. One of the remarkable things about unemployment in this country over the last 14 years is just how low it's been. Are you not risking higher unemployment?
You cannot say that with a straight face, that the one thing that stands between us and a French labour market is discriminating against 18 to 21-year-olds.
That's not the one thing, John. As you know, there are plenty other issues.
Giving 18-year-olds equal pay with 21-year-olds is not going to bring down the British labour market or raise...
No, it'll just make things slightly harder for a lot of young people.
No, it won't. It will be absorbed, and you know it'll be absorbed, because there's no justification for it.
Because businesses have so much spare cash to slosh around these days.
It's a seller's market for labour at the moment. You know that. There's a shortage of labour, a shortage of skilled labour, a shortage of labour working in the right places. It's right for young people to actually benefit from a tight labour market. It's wrong to exclude them from the benefits of it.
Now, there's another issue that hasn't received much airtime, and that is the date by which selling cars, new cars with internal combustion engines, that practice will be banned. Of course, across Europe, it's 2035. In the UK, it's 2035. The Labour Party is saying bring it forward 5 years. Why?
No, the Labour Party think bring it back to where the Tory party used to have it. We're just a party committed to decarbonising the economy. It's selling new cars, as you know. You should have said that when you set out the policy. It's not selling any car. Fair enough. You need to understand Britain is going to go back to the policies that the Tory party used to have. Nothing wrong.
The policies that, of course, I suppose, present some clear blue water there between some more restrictive practices and a freer market.
I think decarbonising the economy has got nothing to do with the free market. Decarbonising the economy is all to do with, one, saving the planet, and two, getting there faster than Germany, which is dominated by its car plants, car manufacturers, getting there faster than Germany. I think Britain wants to not align with Europe. Britain wants to be different from Europe, faster than Europe, better than Europe.
It's potentially a Brexit benefit then. John McTernan, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for joining us. Really good to talk.
Great to see you.
Now with me are my panel, the Conservative peer Lord Goodman and the GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Lord Goodman, let's start with this manifesto, broadly what everyone was expecting.
Can I just take a step back for a moment and question why we're taking any of this seriously at all? This is Keir Starmer's manifesto. Keir Starmer has a record making promises. We know that, as he made solemn pledges in his leadership campaign. He promised to abolish universal credit. He promised, here's another one, to get rid of tuition fees. All these promises have been broken. Now, I know you could make the same sort of argument against some of the things the Conservatives have done, but as matters stand, the Conservatives are not going to win this general election. Keir Starmer is on these polls. And actually, I feel at the deepest level, standing back from this manifesto, we're actually flying a bit blind because we don't know what Keir Starmer's going to do in government. And we know that because he's got a record of breaking his promises.
What do you make of that, Nigel Nelson?
Well, I think circumstances have changed, and so if you go through the various promises, take one that you didn't mention. One of his original 10 promises was he would nationalise the energy industry.
Indeed.
Now, when you look at that, that would cost... I mean, Unite did a great study where they looked at the figures. £90 billion to nationalise it if you just pay the shareholders back their money. Double that if you pay market value. Clearly, 90 billion is just not credible at the present time. So he's gone back on that promise, but I think rather sensibly, rather than keep it and bankrupt the nation.
And yet, there are promises, Nigel, that didn't cost a single penny. For example, free movement with the EU. That was one of Keir Starmer's original pledges. Can economic circumstances explain how he's ditched that one?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. There was also voting rights for EU citizens in this country. That was another one. I think, 5% tax, the top 5% earners would face extra tax. I mean, there's a whole host of things. But I do think things have actually changed since those promises were made. And what we should judge him on is the present ones. Now, Paul makes the point, can you trust him on those promises? That's for the voter to decide.
And there's a big question of trust here.
Well, indeed. Nigel's right to say that the argument is circumstances have changed, and that's the argument Starmer's making now. But I would then ask, is he going to turn around in a year and a half and say circumstances have changed?
Well, they might.
But just to take in which case you can't take any of the promises seriously. But if you are going to take them seriously, if you're going to take the sort of general thrust of the manifesto, what he wants to do is to get higher growth. But again, this raises a question. We've had very low growth for several years. What's he going to do if the growth doesn't come? And the answer is, you cut your spending or you put up your taxes higher. And I can see the direction of travel here. It's going to be higher taxes still.
After all, Rachel Reeves did for a long time talk about more taxes on capital gains, more tax on stocks and shares, changing banding for council tax. It's odd that she was talking about this stuff in 2021, isn't talking about it now. It's possible it will be revived the other side of the election.
Well, it could. I mean, what the sort of code word they use is no plans to do any of those taxes you've just mentioned. We know, of course, that no plans means they're not ruled out, they're on the table. In her defence, I think that you can't ask her to write the next 5 years' budgets now until we've seen what the circumstances are. But it is possible those taxes will go up. We've only got a firm promise on income tax, national insurance and VAT.
Well, hold those thoughts, because we're going to be diving into something that is breaking just this evening. This astonishing poll showing for the first time in the history of British polling the Conservative Party is not in first or second place in a Westminster election. Pretty extraordinary stuff. Reform on 19%, the Conservatives on 18%. We're going to dive into the detail after this.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Tomorrow, well, there'll be some sunshine, but be prepared for some heavy showers and gusty winds at times as well. We've seen some blustery conditions today across the west from this area of low pressure. It's been bringing in these weather fronts which have been bringing in outbreaks of rain, spreading steadily now to northern Scotland and across eastern England. It will turn a little drier through the night, that rain tending to move away from much of Wales, the Midlands and southern England. A few showers will follow in behind. The wind's easing a touch, but still quite breezy. And a very mild night, not really for the time of year, but certainly compared to most nights of late. Temperatures holding up in double figures. So it won't be as chilly first thing tomorrow morning. There'll be some sunshine over the Midlands and parts of eastern England, but still quite breezy along the south coast. And it won't take long before the showers get going. Certainly, of course, Wales expects some showers through the early part of the morning, coming into western Scotland, northwest England. Parts of Northern Ireland may start dry. A different start to the day here compared to today. But across northern Scotland, a very different day here, because after a largely fine day today, there's going to be much more cloud, rain and a fairly brisk wind, and that may stick around across the far north of Scotland for most of the day. Elsewhere, we'll be chasing the showers through. There will be some sunshine, but the downpours will never be too far away. All areas having that kind of really changeable day. 1 minute it's fine, 10 minutes later it's chucking it down with rain. The showers zipping through on a fairly brisk breeze. And when the sun's out, well, it will feel a little warmer than it has done for most of this week. Temperatures still below average for the time of year, but a little bit higher than many days this week. It's showery right through the weekend. Yes, again on Saturday, some sunshine, but some heavy thundery showers likely over central and eastern parts, some slow-moving downpours further north as well. And it stays blustery in places with further sunshine and showers on Sunday. Goodbye.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians and the media, but it's actually about you. We won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear all sides
as you make your decision in the run-up to polling day.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel. Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you.
That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
You'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice.
Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening and welcome back to State of the Nation. My name's Tom Harwood. The time is 36 minutes past 8. Now, earlier today in an interview, Nigel Farage was asked whether he would be willing to lead the Conservative Party in some form in the future. After being pushed on the matter, he ultimately said he would. But now with new polling showing the Reform Party is 1 point ahead of the Conservatives, the idea of Nigel Farage leading some sort of merged Reform Conservative Party after the election, well, is it all that unlikely a possibility? With me to discuss this is Nigel Nelson and Paul Goodman. Lord Goodman, first of all, Lord Goodman, your reaction to the Conservative Party no longer being either first or second place in this one poll?
Of course, you were referring to margin of error. And I think the important element here isn't really that Reform have overtaken the Conservatives. It's that in poll after poll, if you prompt, they're quite close together. If you don't prompt, the Conservative share of the vote's still quite small and Reform's is coming up. So the big lesson here is, at the moment, everyone seems to want to kick the Conservatives. But if sections of the right vote Tory, other sections vote Reform, you're looking at what happened in Canada, which was 15 years of left-wing government. And I think people have not really got their minds around that yet because they're enjoying the party of kicking the Tories. But we're heading towards a very long hangover with a very high bill.
Nigel Nelson, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, looking at the poll, I was doing some number crunching today before this poll dropped, roughly to see what would happen if Reform did overtake the Tories. So, with the help of electoral calculus, putting in some figures there, what you end up getting is that the Tories do end up on 62 MPs. It would be a toss-up whether they or the Lib Dems would be the official opposition. And if you put Reform on 20 points, I appreciate they're not quite there yet, but that's the direction they're going in. They get 6 MPs. If you've got 6 MPs, you're not going to be in a position to take over the Tories.
So that is interesting, Nigel, that even because of the efficiency of the vote, I suppose, and the incumbency effect for Conservatives, even on a lower share than Reform, they get many more MPs.
That's right, and the same with the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems are also will get a lower share. They're on about 10%. They would still come back with more than 60 MPs on that. That's the way the first past the post voting system works.
That is fascinating. I want to bring some detail from within this poll. The headline voting intention wasn't the only thing that was asked. There was also a pretty incisive question there about how voters would feel if the Labour Party won quotes, a very large majority. Well, 38% said that would be a good thing. 38% said that would be a bad thing. And 24% said they didn't know. Coincidentally, 38% is just 1 point ahead of the polling rating of the Labour Party in that poll. So, very interesting stuff there. But of Reform voters, and remember, this is the poll that showed Reform in second place. Of Reform voters, 80% said a large Labour majority would be a very bad thing, and 22% of Reform voters, just 22% of Reform voters actually expect the Labour Party to get a majority. So, Lord Goodman, something there for Conservative strategists to work with.
This is all grist to the mill of a very difficult argument for the Conservatives that they're beginning to start to make. If you listen to senior ministers like Grant Shapps, they began effectively to say, not in these words, but look, guys, we've lost. Just whatever you do, don't hand Labour or what they're calling a super majority, a really big majority. Now, the figures you've cited show that maybe there's some hope that that message would get home because, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded like 62% of voters overall, if you can persuade the don't-knows, would be resistant to this idea, and that a very large number of Reform voters actually really don't want a Labour supermajority. Now, go back to Nigel's figures a moment ago. He was absolutely right about the way the vote falls.
Yes.
Clearly, if one party can stop Labour getting a supermajority, there's only one contender. Yes, it's the derided Conservatives.
Nigel, this is going to be a very difficult moment for many people in the Conservative Party because Lord Goodman's right. They're going to have to basically say to the electorate, we've lost, make us lose less badly, please.
And the trouble is, again, because of the first past the post system, it's a very difficult thing to do. So if you're in a marginal constituency, bear in mind, elections can be decided by just 200,000 voters in marginal seats. Not every vote is worth the same. So if you are a Lib Dem voter wanting to get a Tory out in an area where Labour is second, you might well go and vote Labour. If you are a Tory voter wanted to get a Labour candidate out, there you might go Lib Dem as well. So all you can do is you can do this tactical voting by seat without proportional representation. You can't do it nationally.
Yes, and I suppose the difficulty with squeezing the Reform vote is that they're a new party. No one knows where these voters are. The Conservatives certainly don't. With the Labour Party and Liberals, they can sort of swap around and say, oh, last time these guys came second here, last time these guys came second here. With Reform, you can't really do that at all.
This is, I think, very confusing for a lot of voters and perhaps some of your viewers to follow all these complicated calculations between the four parties. What really is emerging from the Conservative point of view is that they will, if they want to, and it's a bit risky, have a very clear message for the last few weeks, which is if you want to stop Labour having this supermajority, as they call it, the only realistic option you've got is to vote for us. And let's see whether or not that has any effect.
So then what happens? Let's say that there's an electoral outcome where the Conservatives and Reform get roughly the same share of the vote, but the Conservatives end up in third place in parliamentary seats with 50-odd MPs. Reform maybe get 5 or 6 on a good day. What happens between those two groupings in Parliament? And could we see a situation, as Nigel has hinted today, about a sort of merger, Nigel Farage coming through the middle and leading this rump group?
Why would the Tories want to do that? They would still have 10 times the number of MPs than Reform would have. Also, it depends on the nature of the Tory party that comes back. Are they going to be One Nation moderates? They wouldn't do any deals with Nigel Farage. Are they going to be right-wingers? They just might.
Tell you what, just look at Canada, where this actually happened, although their Reform with a bigger party, which is very unlikely to happen here. It took 10 years or more.
For the formal merger.
For the formal merger. And then the leader was not the Nigel Farage equivalent, who's a guy called Preston Manning in this picture of things. You had to have a new generation. That, I suspect, the way things are going, if the Conservatives can't recover, is where you'll go.
You get bad blood and it takes time. Well, thank you very much to my panel. After the break, amidst this news of Labour's plans for constitutional reforms, we'll be asking, has Sir Keir Starmer wigged out?
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Helen Worth, who of course plays Gail Platt in Coronation Street, is going to leave the soap after an epic 50 years. I'm joined now by another Corrie legend, Charlie Lawson, whose character, of course, Jim McDonald, lived across the cobbles from Gail Platt for many years. Welcome to the show, Charlie. I can see you looking at those images there, and it has to be said, fantastic acting. In 50 years, many of us just grew up with these characters and basically think they're part of our family. Can you shed light on some of your happy memories of the talent of Helen Worth?
We saw each other every day. She was a consummate professional and still is. This initially surprised me, but then I thought about it, and I'm frankly not surprised. Having spoken to certain senior members of the cast over the last period of time, you know, when Helen joined, or even when I joined, there was a cast of 25. I would put another 75 on that now, perhaps. It's a different animal now, totally, you know, 4, 5, 6 episodes a week. When Helen started, it would have been 2. She lives in London. She's not getting any younger. And she's done 50 years, for God's sake. Nobody can ask any more of that. And listen, Helen, look at that wee smile. God bless you, Darren. I hope you have a great retirement. The trouble with actors is that we very, very rarely hang our boots up unless the bank balance is full, which it very seldom is. But also, we live for attention. And when you're in the most famous program on the planet, that attention 9 times out of 10 is an extremely good experience.
The People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm Tom Harwood. Now, an element of the Labour manifesto you will not see discussed, particularly prominently on other channels. What on earth is going to happen to Parliament under a Labour government? Yes, the party is now committed to reforming what it describes as arcane procedures and outdated working practices in our ancient legislature. They will establish a modernisation committee tasked with reforming House of Commons procedures. What on earth could this look like? Well, one clue is to look at what Keir Starmer himself has said about reform of the court system in the past.
I do think it's time that the court system became much more of a place where the ordinary person feels they can go, and I think that means stripping judges and lawyers of their wigs and gowns and making it much more like a GP's health centre.
Yes, that really was Keir Starmer. Much more like a GP health centre, presumably. That means contacting MPs only between 8 and 8:05 in the morning before waiting weeks for an appointment. But seriously, likely this means gone will be traditional gowns of the clerks or the Victorian white tie of the doorkeepers, a more clinical, sanitised Parliament. After all, that's slightly what we saw with Tony Blair. See how points of order used to be called during divisions.
Yes. Point of order. Madam Speaker.
Get the hat, I will hear him, otherwise I can't. Hat.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. A relatively simple matter for you to rule on. As the Treaty of Rome, as amended, includes the words acquis communautaire.
Yes, the wonderful collapsible top hat that was needed in order to make a point of order during a division. Parliament lost a little magic when that rule was scrapped under Tony Blair. Many will no doubt hope that more of the quirks and traditions that make our Parliament so special are not so hastily done away with. Well, joining me now is the barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes, and of course my panel, the journalist and Conservative peer Lord Goodman, and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Jerry, we're going to start with you. You, of course, were an MP in the 90s.
And I wore the hat.
You wore the hat.
I was an MP in the 80s as well.
Yes.
When you were just a twinkle in your dad's eye. But in fact, it was really
My dad
weird.
wasn't a toolmaker, to make it clear. But no, so you wore the hat.
Oh,
this
yeah,
was
of
a
course.
marvellous
Yes,
tradition.
it was like a frisbee because it was a collapsible hat. So if Nigel was over, that's right. That's what you want to do, is put it on. But it made sense. And the reason it made sense was if people are milling around and people are jumping up and down, if you're wearing a top hat, people notice you. So it was quite sensible.
Right. But clearly, this was one of the traditions that was got rid of under the first Blair government. The risk is, for traditionalists at least, that many more traditions will be scrapped by Keir Starmer, the man that wanted to remove gowns and wigs from barristers and
Tom,
judges.
I don't care about that. What I care about is the running of Parliament and what could happen in the House of Lords. Because in 2022, Gordon Brown made it absolutely clear he wanted to abolish the House of Lords. Now, of course, we all want to get rid of Lord Goodman. But the House of Lords works as a revising chamber. The fact is, you guys pick up the mess of the House of Commons. On paper, it looks rubbish. In reality, it's right. Now, you're going to have a Labour government with a massive majority and with a large left-wing element. They can ride roughshod. They say the traditions. It won't be the traditions of wigs and gowns and things like that. It could be about parliamentary democracy. We are now the executive. We can do what we want. And if I was well, I will be voting, and I'll be voting Conservative. God help me. Of course. Oh, shut up. Of course I will. But it's scary. It really is scary.
Well, Nigel Nelson, what do you make of it all?
Well, I mean, I think that the House of Lords thing is the one that worries me.
Yes.
One of the things in the manifesto was that he would get rid of hereditary peers. Yes. The reason that Tony Blair didn't get rid of hereditary peers was he wanted to too, as well, was because our head of state is a hereditary position. So if you take the hereditary peers out of the Constitution, that threatens the monarchy.
But many people think that it's absolutely egregious that there are these unelected people sitting... Oh, actually, to be fair, the hereditary peers are the only elected people in the House of Lords. Obviously, of a very small pool. Paul, tell us how that works.
Well, of course you need some House of Lords reform, but the scandalous thing about this absurd proposal, which Jerry Hayes has just rightly torn to pieces, is you need proper House of Commons reform, rather than all this nonsense about silk robes and wigs and all the rest of it.
Hang on,
the House of Commons is not doing its job.
I came here to have a trivial discussion, and you gentlemen are trying to... You're trying to make this much more substantive than the egregious thing, in my view, of MPs wearing T-shirts and trainers in the House of Commons. Does that not set your sort of soul ablaze?
I think, from point of view of the viewers, seriously, in the long term, the viewers are more concerned about how the Commons works and doesn't work. And the Commons is not scrutinising legislation properly. It did in a more thorough way before '97, and these great people like Jerry Hayes sadly departed the Commons. But since then, more and more of the work has been pushed up to us, and let's face it, we're not elected.
And what will happen if the House of Lords becomes elected? You'll have the whipping system. Party politics will come into it, and it won't be the independent revising chamber that we have at the moment.
We only have a minute left, and I want to raise perhaps the biggest can of worms for all who work in Parliament, and that's where Parliament is. It's far overdue some big renovations. Nigel, in your view, do you think that Parliament will move out of Westminster for a period of time?
No. I think we're stuck there. That they've been going on about this renovation for years and years. I think Parliament will stay there and the MPs will stay there, and they'll rebuild Parliament around them.
I had lunch the other day with Lord Lisvane. He used to be Clerk of the House of Commons. He was telling me one of the biggest problems that they had to prepare for is what would happen to MPs' excrement. Because there is a big... This is true. There is a big digger which hasn't been repaired since 1883.
Blimey. Well, on that note, literally talking a word I don't think we're even allowed to say this side of the watershed, thank you very much to Jerry and my panel. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's. What's coming up?
Yeah, well, I've got loads on tonight, Tom. Reform have overtaken the Tories in the polls, but I've unearthed some clips that I think show some shocking left-wing bias from establishment media. We're going to be talking about that. A trans swimmer has been cheating his way into women's races. Everybody with a brain in their head knows that that is completely wrong and a massive issue, especially for women, Tom. But I do know, I think, though, that the weather in Somerset is going to be absolutely wonderful.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Tomorrow, well, there'll be some sunshine, but be prepared for some heavy showers and gusty winds at times as well. We've seen some blustery conditions today across the west from this area of low pressure. It's been bringing in these weather fronts which have been bringing in outbreaks of rain, spreading steadily now to northern Scotland and across eastern England. It will turn a little drier through the night, that rain tending to move away from much of Wales, the Midlands and southern England. A few showers will follow in behind. The wind's easing a touch, but still quite breezy. And a very mild night, not really for the time of year, but certainly compared to most nights of late. Temperatures holding up in double figures. So it won't be as chilly first thing tomorrow morning. There'll be some sunshine over the Midlands and parts of eastern England, but still quite breezy along the south coast. And it won't take long before the showers get going. Certainly, of course, Wales expects some showers through the early part of the morning, coming into western Scotland, northwest England. Parts of Northern Ireland may start dry. A different start to the day here compared to today. But across northern Scotland, a very different day here, because after a largely fine day today, there's going to be much more cloud, rain and a fairly brisk wind, and that may stick around across the far north of Scotland for most of the day. Elsewhere, we'll be chasing the showers through. There will be some sunshine, but the downpours will never be too far away. All areas having that kind of really changeable day. 1 minute it's fine, 10 minutes later it's chucking it down with rain. The showers zipping through on a fairly brisk breeze. And when the sun's out, well, it will feel a little warmer than it has done for most of this week. Temperatures still below average for the time of year, but a little bit higher than many days this week. It's showery right through the weekend. Yes, again on Saturday, some sunshine, but some heavy thundery showers likely over central and eastern parts, some slow-moving downpours further north as well. And it stays blustery in places with further sunshine and showers on Sunday. Goodbye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our summer spectacular. 3 top prizes that have to be won. There's cash. £15,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like this summer. Plus a brand new iPhone 15 with a set of Apple AirPods. And if that wasn't enough, we'll also treat you to some fun in the sun with £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction this summer. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but it's actually about you.
And we won't ever forget that. Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
Now more than ever, it's important to hear
all sides as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's election channel.
It's midday. Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news.